What is up, my Squirtleites? It is I, your king, and today I want to bring to you my thoughts and impressions on Pokemon Legends Arceus. I know, I'm a little bit late to the party on this one. Pretty much everybody has already had the discourse on this game. I mean, granted, people are still talking about it, and we'll continue to talk about it for quite some time, but I just want to give my thoughts on it because this is a bit of an interesting case study, a bit of an interesting change for the Pokemon series. So there's a lot of merit in talking about it, but I get this video is a little bit late. I originally intended to have it out on Saturday the 5th, but here's the thing. I went on vacation. I had a vacation planned for the 30th through to the 3rd. We were supposed to fly back on the 3rd. The airline that we used only flies in and out of there twice a week, so we only had the option of Thursday and Sunday for both. And then Wednesday rolled around, and we all got told that our flight got canceled. So then we were stuck in a hotel for 3 more days doing absolutely nothing except, well, for me, I was just playing more of this game, and on Sunday the 6th, I was finally able to fly back. Now I'm recording this on Tuesday the 8th, and you're getting the video on Thursday the 10th. That's why this is a little bit later than I meant for it to be. It was a mess. It sucked, but at least, like I said, those extra few days did give me time to actually finish the game, or at least the main story, and I've played about 4 hours beyond that in the post-game. Mostly just doing, I did a little bit of story stuff, but also finishing some requests that I kind of left behind and trying to increase my rank a little bit more. As far as the rank system goes, if you actually know what that is, I'm just shy of rank 8. Really, really, really close. I'll explain what a rank is in a bit if you don't actually know what I'm talking about, but I just want to throw all that out there so you know where I'm coming from in terms of experience. All of the gameplay in this video will be in the hub area and the first 2 areas of the game, so as not to spoil much. There will be no story elements whatsoever. I will not start any requests and talk to NPCs for side quests and things like that. And the team that I'm using is going to be not my main team, the team that I used throughout my entire playthrough. It's going to be a bunch of weaker Pokemon I caught along the way, just so that the gameplay itself is more interesting and I can actually showcase some of my talking points. This video is also going to be scripted for the most part, because if I tried to live commentate over this entire thing, this video would probably go about an hour and a half. I'm not even kidding. I have a lot of thoughts, and scripting it is probably the best way that I can actually condense those thoughts, but it also means that what I'm saying here isn't necessarily going to line up with what's going on screen, but I will, at the very least, try to show off the gameplay to its fullest extent, again, without spoiling anything. I guess I can start by saying, as far as what I think of the game, that I really, really like it in a sort of complicated way. Legends Arceus, and yes, I'm calling it Arceus because that's how it's said in English in official Pokemon material, so shut up if you like Arceus more, that's fine, you can do that, but don't go criticizing my pronunciation. Anyway, this game is essentially if Game Freak took a look at the Pokemon formula and said, what if we made Pokemon again, but also Monster Hunter? And I'm not talking like the fighting huge monsters part, but more so the semi-open world map exploration and the mix of strategy and tactics that you'd see in a game like Monster Hunter. And I really don't like the Breath of the Wild comparison I've seen tossed out there, because that's really not how this game behaves at all. It's still more RPG than action-based. It retains those core elements that make it a Pokemon game, like battling and catching monsters, having a team of your own and training them, and it isn't truly open world. It's sort of split into sections, themselves all self-contained. You're dropped into areas of the map rather than one big cohesive open space that you can seamlessly transition between. If you want to leave an area of the map and go to another one, you have to return to the hub area every single time before moving on to the next one. Again, not that dissimilar from Monster Hunter. Each of these maps usually has different types of terrain, different types of Pokemon to be found, and there's always the same core gameplay loop to fall back on no matter where it is. But let me explain in more detail. Pokemon Legends Arceus has you playing as a Pokemon surveyor rather than a standard trainer. You were given a Pokedex to complete, you have the ability to catch Pokemon, and you'll battle some trainers at times, but that's kind of where the similarities to the usual formula end. You don't complete the Pokedex by simply catching Pokemon. You're also there to study them. This game is set in what seems to be a parallel to like early 19th century Japan, pre-westernization. You're not just there to fill out any old Pokedex, but what is sort of implied to be the very first Pokedex. You need to study these Pokemon, catch several of them, sometimes in various ways, study them while they eat, watch them perform various moves, catch different forms of the same Pokemon, or just straight up knock a few out. You're not a trainer, because in this world, trainers aren't a thing yet. People aren't as comfortable with the idea of Pokemon, nor do they understand them yet, so it's your job to help with that through your employer, the Survey Corps. Through them, you will try to increase your rank by completing more tasks and thus unlocking more features. Or you will help townsfolk in and around Jubilife Village, this game's hub area, and clearly the predecessor to Jubilife City that fans of Generation 4 and its remakes know and love. The survey course serves as the crux of the game's progression and story. They are who you work for, report back to, and unlock future stuff. In most Pokemon games, you use HMs, train higher level Pokemon, and use better items by earning gym badges. In this game, it's all about your rank. Rank is increased purely based on the number of tasks you complete in your Pokedex. So no, you can't just blaze through this game running from point A to point B and hope to beat it that way. You gotta do your job, and I like that. It nicely shifts the focus of your efforts, retaining the familiarity of a Pokemon game, but completely changing the methodology. If you don't do what's asked of you, the game will let you know pretty quickly that you're getting too big for your britches in a few different ways. For one, you can't even unlock certain areas unless you reach a certain rank. But the other way is that, well, this game just has a steeper difficulty curve than your average Pokemon game. And I know that isn't saying much, but it's still unique in the way Legends Arceus specifically handles its difficulty. For starters, battling in this game has been changed a fair bit. It's still mostly turn-based, but now there's a turn order system. Kind of like the Grandia series, or I guess a more recent example and one that I've showcased on this channel, Child of Light, but not exactly the same. It's just kind of similar. The speed stat in this game still determines who attacks first, but now thanks to the turn order, it also determines who attacks more frequently, and you can manipulate that in various ways. The most obvious way is priority moves. Moves that always went first in the main games like Quick Attack or Aqua Jet now affect turn order by ensuring you can attack twice before your opponent does, or if they're faster than you, at least offset their speed and to prevent them from attacking twice after you've only attacked once. What further affects this is move mastery. As you train and level up your Pokemon, they will obviously learn moves, which is cool, but they can also master them after they've had those moves for a few levels as well, or by other various means that I really won't get into because now's not the time or place. Move mastery unlocks agile and strong style versions of those moves. Agile style moves increase the priority of any move affecting the turn order while dealing about, don't quote me on this, but I think 25% less damage. Oh, and it consumes 2 power points instead of the standard 1. Strong Style, on the other end, has almost the opposite effect, dealing more damage and making less accurate moves more accurate, all at the cost of hurting your turn order in future. It's basically a gamble either way. With Agile moves, you're trying to set yourself up for the opportunity to deal damage twice before the opponent can hit back, while with Strong Style, you're hoping to knock them out in a single blow, or else you're going to be the one who gets hit twice, and most of the time, twice is really all you or your opponent needs. Pokemon just flat out hit a lot harder in this game, and that goes both ways. I've had half my Pokemon's health knocked out by Pokemon 10 levels lower than my own, even without a type advantage. You are greatly encouraged to battle like every hit your Pokemon takes is unacceptable, and it makes battles more tense. You can't really waltz into most situations recklessly, and that's also because your opponents can use Agile and Strong Style moves as well. This, of course, gets even more sketchy when you find yourself up against more than one Pokemon at once, because this game doesn't really care about being fair. Legends Arceus doesn't do double or triple battles. At least, not for you. You can only ever throw out one Pokemon in a battle at a time, and the opponents can gang up on you both in trainer battles and in the wild when encountering groups of aggressive Pokemon. It's not fair, but that's because the battle system isn't the emphasis here. Now, that's not to say this game is super challenging or anything. I've only had maybe 2 instances in my playthrough where I legitimately blacked out, and that's just because I would sometimes get ahead of myself and rush into situations when I wasn't quite ready for it, which, on that note, this game still gives equal experience to your entire party as long as they haven't fainted, which has been an intrinsic mechanic of the main series since Generation 6. But this time, the game is actually balanced around it. So, your team isn't over-leveled to the extreme throughout the main story like in Pokemon Sword and Shield. I found myself generally at level the entire time, and being at level is not a very comforting thing. Like I said, attacks hit hard, and you will not tank super effective hits very often on even the most defensive Pokemon without proper EV training, which is another system that was changed to be more accessible and streamlined, but not necessarily easy either. EVs, or effort values in previous games, acted as a way of truly training your Pokemon to specialize in 1 or 2 various stats, by battling Pokemon who were strong in said stats. In Legends Arceus, that system is completely thrown out the window, instead replaced by stat tiers, or effort value tiers, I guess is more apt to describe it. All stats can be leveled up to 10 EVs, but you need a different type of item to level your EVs past each specific checkpoint. Grit Dust will only allow you to level a stat up to 3, but Grit Gravel will allow you to take it up to 6. But Grit Pebbles will allow you to take it up to 9, and the 10th level can only be achieved with a Grit Rock. Obviously, the rarity of these items is also determined by their respective values. To give you an idea of how tough EV training is, I've only maxed out one Pokemon up to this point, with the rest of my core team sitting around 7 or 8 in most of their stats. It's tedious, yes, and EVs are kind of supposed to be, but the benefit is that it's way easier to understand, and you don't completely screw your Pokemon's EVs up by playing the game normally, and you could theoretically max them all out equally as well. On top of that, IVs, or individual values, are completely removed from the game, and the return of mints to change your Pokemon's nature means that any Pokemon you catch has the potential to be the best that it can be, and I love that. That said, the biggest sacrifice in the face of all of this is the removal of breeding. There is no daycare in Legends Arceus. No eggs, none of that. And while I know some people will probably lament the loss, I'm actually pretty happy with it. It still feels like work to get the best Pokemon possible, but I don't have to discard anything of sentimental and personal value to achieve it. Technically, I can use anything I want, I just have to put in the time to work on that specific Pokemon. And on that note, probably my absolute favorite change this entire game makes to the battle system has to do with your moves. Now, 4 moves is still the limit your Pokemon can have at any one time, but you can swap and trade out those moves with anything else your Pokemon is capable of learning, either via leveling or via this game's move tutor. You just go into the menu, select a Pokemon, then select the change move option, and boom. You can swap any move in and out on the fly, force the limit, but no longer does your Pokemon permanently lose access to that move, or even temporarily at the cost of things such as TMs or heart scales. Now, some people might say that leaving the limit at 4 is kind of dumb and archaic design, but I mean, it's obviously for balance reasons. Look, I have a Glaceon, which is my strongest Pokemon on my core team. This thing has Ice Beam, Calm Mind, Shadow Ball, and Water Pulse, which is already really good coverage for a hard-hitting special attacker. If I could also give it Quick Attack for priority and Hyper Beam for those instances when I run into a darker water type, and Icy Wind in the event that I care more about lowering priority than dealing outright damage on top of what it already has, that would be stupid. And keep in mind, moves that raise and lower stats got a substantial buff in this game because they're an all or nothing thing. Let me explain. Calm Mind used to raise just the special attack and special defense of the user by 1 stage, which is pretty damn good on its own. And Legends Arceus, a single use raises the user's attack, defense, special attack, and special defense to the max in 1 turn. And you can even use it Agile style to instantly jump into an offensive move immediately after the fact to make it even more stupid. And the only downside to this is that the effect only lasts a few turns rather than the rest of the battle. But, I mean, in this game with how fast-paced it is, a few turns often is the rest of the battle. So, like, what I already have is enough. To allow a Pokemon to utilize 5, 6, or more moves at once would be pretty extreme overkill, I think. All in all, the actual training and battling is It's more fun. It's more fast-paced than ever. It's more dynamic, free, and engaging. And I like it. I like all of the changes that they have made. Now, would I want to see this system moved into the core series? Not necessarily, but I think for what Legends Arceus is trying to be, and possibly future games in this particular series, I do enjoy it quite a bit. But, as I said before, this isn't even the primary component of Legends Arceus' gameplay. The focal point is what you do outside of battle. Catching Pokemon, gathering materials, exploring the map, completing tasks for the Pokedex, and interacting with all the many things you'll find throughout the world. Think of the overworld gameplay as the Safari Zone from earlier Pokemon games taken to its logical extreme. Yes, you can take the Pokemon into a battle and either KO or catch them that way, but unless you're in that battle screen, you're doing everything else without your Pokemon, or at least your team members. Every map is littered with all sorts of Pokemon that walk around the area, much like they did in the Pokemon Let's Go games or Pokemon Sword and Shield, except now, this is the only way to encounter Pokemon. There are no random tall grass encounters whatsoever. Different Pokemon will respond to you in different ways. Some will be skittish, running away and eventually disappearing the moment they spot you. Some are more on the docile side, kind of leaning in either the passive or aggressive direction, and will take just a longer time to notice you in general. The latter kind will just instantly attack you the second they see you. These are also the kinds of Pokemon that will gang up on you in the event you find yourself caught in a 1v2 or a 1v3. As a surveyor, you have to strategize and pick the scenario on your terms. You can try to catch a Pokemon outright, which actually won't work at all when the Pokemon is in its aggro state, but you can increase the odds by using better types of Pokeballs that you can purchase or craft later. Or you can catch a Pokemon in stealth and even more specially from behind, which when executed successfully will trigger a sort of flashy animation letting you know that you've done it right. You can bait or agitate Pokemon with various items like food or balls of mud to draw them into a false sense of security or chase them away from another target you're more interested in. You can also initiate battles by throwing your own Pokemon's ball at the target, but much like you do with catching Pokemon, you can stun them by throwing your Pokemon's ball at the target from behind, allowing you a couple of free turns before they can begin to fight back. On top of this, there are ingredients scattered all over the place which can be used to craft Pokeballs, potions, revives, food, or situational items like firecrackers to scare off a Pokemon, or smoke bombs to conceal yourself when you don't have any tall grass to take advantage of. In the event that you are attacked, you can dodge roll out of the way, which is a pretty effective method of avoiding damage. You're basically invincible during the entire dodge animation. You just have to be careful to not end the animation in or next to the area of effect of the attack, or you'll still take a hit. Your character doesn't necessarily have a health bar. The damage they take will instead be signified by the borders of the screen getting sort of, I don't know, like rough or mangled, I guess? It's kind of hard to explain. You just kind of have to see it. But you can only take a few hits before the border actually goes red. At that point, one more hit and you'll black out, which is the same effect as losing a battle. When you die in this game, it hurts way more than in previous games. Instead of losing money, you lose a ton of items at random, including some that in that moment could feel almost irreplaceable, like extra large experience candies or something, which sucks. And the healing process in this game is very slow. I'm talking like 20 to 30 seconds before your health regenerates after taking a hit. And in boss battles, your health just doesn't come back at all. Now you're probably wondering, why did they opt for items rather than money? Well, money in this game is actually pretty difficult to come by, at least in the earlier stages. The only way that you can very consistently earn money is by completing tasks and turning in your tasks to the professor at the end of an expedition. You can sell some items, but you really won't be able to sell any super valuable or worthwhile items until much later in the game that you can either craft or unlock by completing certain quests. So I do think it is better that they went for losing items because, yes, it's still a pretty solid punishment for dying, which you shouldn't be doing in the first place, but it also doesn't cripple you as bad as it would be if you lost a lot of money. Now, that's not to say that this game is super difficult, but it can catch you off guard if you aren't careful. Keeping in mind, many of your tasks require you to watch Pokemon you're trying to catch perform certain moves, and in doing so, you sometimes gotta take a hit. The cherry on top of all of this is alpha Pokemon, which are supersized, hyper-aggressive, and severely over-leveled versions of Pokemon you'll find throughout the map, signified by red glowing eyes, much bigger overworld models, and some intense music that starts to creep in whenever you're in the vicinity. These Pokemon are harder to catch, hit a lot harder in battle, and consequently are worth more experience, and catching them has extra benefits, like them knowing a move they can't learn otherwise. The only problem that I have with alpha Pokemon is that the threat they pose kind of wanes throughout the game. In the starting area, you can run into Pokemon that are almost 30 levels higher than your own, which means it's essentially impossible to catch them by battling and weakening them. So you gotta play around in the overworlding and try to catch it that way, which is dangerous and very risky in its own right, but super rewarding if you can snag one. Later on in the game, however, alphas will only be about 5 or 10 levels higher, or even at level in some instances, which on the one hand still makes them rewarding to battle, but it sort of feels like the challenge kind of shifts from everything being an equal opportunity threat, with the alphas being this terrifying presence you just want to avoid, to being more about farming alphas for experience, while the rest of the Pokemon in the overworld are more minor inconveniences, but I guess that's the price you pay for actually feeling stronger as you progress throughout the game. It's a nitpick, I know, but otherwise, I really do love the entire system that Legends Arceus revolves around. I love the fact that I feel more incentivized to not just catch Pokemon, but to study them. I love that battling and catching alphas largely feels like an event. I love that you're constantly achieving everything by the skin of your teeth, rather than just cleaving a path through routes filled with trainer battles and wild Pokemon that only serve as an annoyance until you have access to repels. You are constantly present in this game, figuring out what needs to be done, referring to your Pokedex for tasks, gathering materials for quests, or to stock up, all while managing inventory space, which actually I do think could have been handled a little bit better. It's a little bit too limiting in this game. And of course, on top of all that, you need to know when to engage or when to run. There is no shame in running from certain battles in this game. In fact, when I encountered alphas in this game, if I didn't catch them by surprise and get that stun effect, I almost always ran away from them, and still do most of the time, because it's just not worth it if you can't catch them unaware. Ride Pokemon also make a return here, but they're functionally the HMs of the game, which I guess isn't different from other games, but this game doesn't really have HMs in their traditional sense. There's no such thing as flash or strength necessarily. In this game, all of the ride Pokemon are just simply means of traversal. Weirdeer, the new Stantler evolution, is by far the one that I use the most because it kind of just acts as a replacement for the bike. It goes fast and it can jump, but it can't do everything on its own, and the more of these ride Pokemon you unlock, the more the maps open up to you. And I actually think this has nice progression without feeling artificial. I really love the gameplay here. It's just, I mean, it's constantly fun, constantly engaging, much like I said the battle system is. You're always there. You're always in the moment. There's so much about the traditional Pokemon formula that while I still love it, I feel like I can passively click through most of it without paying attention so much. I have always joked that Pokemon is the one-handed game because I can literally sit there holding my Game Boy Advance playing Pokemon with one hand while I edit a video with my other hand. I don't need to pay attention to all that much. Legends Arceus is not like that. However, I can see this game fizzling out a little faster for some in the later stages due to what Legends Arceus asks of you versus what a normal Pokemon game does. Sword and Shield, for instance, for as divisive as it is, and I concede it has far and away the weakest main story in the series, being a pretty bland first 20 hours, it also, on the flip side, has possibly the most enjoyable and massive post-game of any Pokemon game ever, especially with access to the DLCs that further expand the range of locations, the number of Pokemon that can be found, and your access to every tool a Pokemon player could possibly ask for, especially on the competitive side. Legends Arceus is so much more narrow in its focus, while at the same time allowing for more dynamic interaction with the player. More memorable moments, yes, but all you're here to do is fill out the pages of the Pokedex. There's not really any incentive beyond the personal to train your Pokemon all the way up to level 100 and hyper train and crossbreed and all that other nonsense that you see in other games. So in that regard, yeah, it remains to be seen. I haven't put enough hours into this game to say for sure yet, but I have a hard time seeing Legends Arceus being quite as enjoyable in hour 100 as it is in hour 10. But for those hours that it is enjoyable, it's probably the most quality time I've had with this franchise, and that's saying a lot. That being said, there is one more subjective thing I want to touch on, and I feel like this is one that a lot of Pokemon fans can relate to. Look, Pokemon Legends Arceus, for all of its gameplay elements, and we can talk about, and analyze all of the nitty-gritty aspects of it, I think the thing that Pokemon Legends Arceus does the best, though, is that trainer fantasy. Is that fantasy that Pokemon fans have had ever since Generation 1. I mean, who hasn't played Pokemon? Who didn't play Pokemon as a kid and imagine doing so much more than you were doing in the game? Like, yeah, in Pokemon games, it's a top-down RPG. You're walking around and you're just walking through grass and catching Pokemon. But as kids, we all envisioned ourselves, the action side of it, dodging Pokemon attacks, really being in there, giving those commands as trainers, and actually feeling like we were immersed in this world. Really, if you didn't play Pokemon that way to some extent, at least as a kid, again, what were you even playing Pokemon for? I mean, there's so many better RPGs than that. That is, I think, a large part of Pokemon's allure. It's why Pokemon Go caught on so much, because it fulfills that fantasy to a degree. It actually makes us feel like we're trainers. That's what we as kids always wanted out of Pokemon. And Legends Arceus gets that power fantasy down better than any other game. Like, it's not even close. It really does take it to a whole nother level. It's so much more engaging. Like, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that have been playing this game that are just like, my gosh, this is everything that I dreamed of when I was thinking about, when I was thinking in my mind, I was forming all of these imaginary scenarios playing Pokemon and, imagining myself as a trainer. Legends Arceus is by far the closest to realizing that dream. And I know that's a purely subjective thing, and it's something that's not as easy to understand, especially as an adult, or if you're, a later adopter to the Pokemon series. You're somebody that came out of this series as an adult and you don't have those childhood memories. It's probably not something that's as easy to understand or necessarily as easy to relate to, but and I don't even think that I relate to that as much as certain other people do. I don't feel that strongly in that department as other people do, but I totally see it. I totally get it. This game evokes those emotions, there is something to be said for that. There's a lot to be said for that, actually. I think that's an incredibly crucial part, but it's not necessarily something that can be deconstructed. It's not something that can be analyzed and broken down in the same way that it applies to other games. It purely comes down to Pokemon's long-lasting impact and the influence that it's had on so many people, and how big and successful it is that as a franchise as a whole. The fact that it is the most successful multimedia franchise ever in the whole world, and that this is the first time where that allure, that dynamic, that the thing that we all dreamed of, this is the first time where we've gotten just so close to feeling that. That is, I think, probably the biggest strength of Legends Arceus. Now, as for its weaknesses and the things that it is not the best at, because I gotta be fair here, let's start with the story. Now, I don't want to, obviously, like I said, I don't want to spoil anything. And it's very easy to spoil stuff with this game because there's actually a twist in regards to the premise of this game that's made apparent in the very first cutscene in the game. And I don't think it was because I wasn't paying attention to the promotional material or anything. I just didn't expect the premise of this game to be exactly what it is. I kind of had an idea, but there are some things that I wasn't expecting in regards to what's going on with the plot. So I won't actually talk about the plot elements themselves. I guess I'll just kind of stick to, well, how good is it? What can you expect from this game that's different from any other games in the series? Unfortunately, my favorite part of this story boils down to its implications. Things it hints at, but it doesn't outright confirm as fact. And again, all that stuff is very context sensitive and very spoiler heavy, so I can't get into it. What I will say is that the nucleus of this game's plot is pretty standard for Pokemon, and it isn't very high praise coming from me. I don't like Pokemon stories. I don't think that's a secret at this point. I've said this many times. Most Pokemon stories they just feel like they're there for the sake of being there. Pokemon Black and White are, in my opinion, the pinnacle of storytelling in the Pokemon series. And even then, by the standards of other JRPGs, those games are still pretty weak. If I want a good Pokemon plot, just give me the manga, where time and care is actually taken into developing characters and events. Now hold on, don't jump the gun just yet, because I'm talking about just the plot here. In the context of its universe and explaining what's going on, Legends Arceus is very bare bones. Many of the characters are uninteresting, although not all of them, and your mute protagonist is 100% a self-insert meant to make you feel attached to what you're doing in the game, rather than what you're being told is happening in the game. Key distinction there. However, there are a lot of nuggets that this game offers at times that do make Legends Arceus' world building a lot better than its actual plot. At times, things get more serious, darker, harsher in tone. Dialogue is far less sugar-coated and tame than before, again, at times, and it's a breath of fresh air when it happens. I'll go through entire cutscenes just kind of nodding my head, yeah, okay, Wait, did that character just imply that if my protagonist didn't have the job I have, I'd be left out in the wild to die and fend for myself? What the hell? I mean, it's instances like that that do occasionally pique my interest. It isn't a lot, but it's something, and I don't think I've done anything but mindlessly click through a Pokemon story ever since Pokemon Black and White 2. The stories feel like they're just there for the sake of it, to give the gameplay some sort of purpose. And this time, I mean, yeah, I guess that's still true to a point, but there are actual moments that are memorable. A couple lines of dialogue here and there that surprise or catch my interest. World building that actually makes me care. Not that much about individual characters, mind you, although, like I did hint, there are a couple of them that are genuinely interesting, but it's more so the actual world itself that I'm invested in, the setting of the game. Okay, that's gameplay, structure, progression, story. What else? Soundtrack's pretty nice, actually. I feel like the soundtracks of Pokemon games have just been steadily improving in general over the years, even in some of the weakest games in the series, and Legends is really, really good. It's very piano-heavy, which is thematically appropriate. Not in the same way that Colosseum and Gale of Darkness were also piano-heavy, though. Those games were more jazzy and lively. Legends Arceus is much more delicate on the instrumentation and less afraid to incorporate other instruments, but the piano itself is usually what sticks out the most and is at the forefront of most of the compositions. Even in this game's most intense moments, the music actually has a little bit of restraint, and I think that's welcome in a game like this, where the entire premise and idea of Legends Arceus is mystery and subversion of the expectations that Pokemon fans have had after so many dozens of games and more than 25 years of experience with it. It's fitting and nice to listen to, but I'm no music theorist who's able to pick apart the composition super well. Would I listen to it on my own time? No. It's no Ori and the Will of the Wisps or Journey soundtrack, I'll tell you that much. But it also isn't trying to be, which I do want to be fair to the game in that regard. Good soundtrack. Really good. Not amazing, but it's good. Yeah, that's it. I think that's it. That's everything I want to talk about. Oh, I'm kidding, obviously. There's a Dawn fan in the room, if you will. The hottest topic in the world, the one thing that people will not shut up about leading up to this game's release, and persistent detractors still won't shut up about. And that's, of course, the game's visuals. Ugh, okay, look. Before I start, let me just divorce the discussion on graphics from the discussion on the game's tech. I've been playing this game in handheld mode exclusively. The footage you've been watching this entire time is my first experience with the game in docked mode, and I will say the aliasing looks noticeably worse in docked mode than it did in handheld. Handheld is my preferred way to play Switch games 95% of the time. It's kind of the only use I have for the system outside of multiplayer experiences. I have an Xbox, I have a PS4, I have a PS5, I have a PC. Unless the Switch is the only way I can play a game, I'll opt to play it any other way. And at that point, it's comfiest to play the game on my bed than in my chair. So, I played this in handheld mode. This game runs at 30 frames per second. Yes, 30 frames per second shouldn't be acceptable anymore, flat out. This is by far my biggest issue with Legends Arceus, especially due to its more real-time action-based gameplay. If this were still a turn-based RPG, I would care significantly less because frame rate is crucial to gameplay. But in a genre where the timing and speed of inputs is less important, it's obviously less a big deal. This game, being an entirely new type of game, does not get that pass, flat out. Not in 2022, and I can completely understand people who want to pass on this game because of that. I've certainly passed on games myself because of frame rates before. Games that specifically go out of their way to prioritize resolution over frame rate are a huge no-no for me, and every time I hear a spokesperson make the stupid case for it when trying to defend their game from running at 30, it's pretty much an automatic no-buy for me. I will, however, give games that run at 30 a chance if the excuses aren't made and the frame rate is at least consistent. I think I would personally be harder on Legends Arceus if the game was more challenging, more punishing, etc., but it isn't. And I can't say the frame rate actually negatively impacted my personal performance in the game at any one point, but your mileage obviously will vary. It was almost always consistent at 30, only ever dropping frames in some very strange areas that felt as though it had nothing to do with the immediate action on screen. My guess is it had to do with loading multiple Pokemon at distances I couldn't see, but that's just a guess. If you want a better technical breakdown, then I implore you to go check out Digital Foundry. They're the best at this stuff, always do great work. Definitely go look that up if you have any misgivings in the technical department. I think that this should be and will always be the biggest sticking point against Legends Arceus, the technical side. Okay, now let's push that aside and focus purely on the game's visual appeal, the look, the animations, the character models, the texture quality, and how pretty this game looks at a standstill or, well, even in motion. Originally, I wanted to rip into this subject. I still do, but I don't want to come off as if I'm trying to invalidate other people's opinions. I'll try to keep this as subjective as possible, but it's a pretty sore subject for me personally, as someone who's been following video games pretty much since the beginning of 3D games in a mainstream sense. And I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a history lesson. This was all the way back in the PS1 and 64 era. That's how long I've been playing games. I remember when they used to look ugly as sin, and we really didn't care, because anybody who tries to tell you that N64 games looked good for the time is lying. We knew that Super Nintendo games were objectively prettier than N64 and PS1 games, but that wasn't the point. That wasn't the focus back then. We still enjoyed those ugly games in spite of it. The freedom of movement and the sense of spectacle that models provided that pixels weren't capable of was what really had us excited. I'm not trying to go all old man yells at cloud on you guys, but I grew up in an era where games strived to be fun. Yes, they did chase trends, certainly. The 90s console wars over who had the most bits was at the forefront of marketing in the game industry, but even still, the consoles that could produce the most enjoyable games were the ones that survived, in a general sense, of course. Good consumer practices were also a part of that, but it's pretty safe to say that consoles led the way for the right reasons. Oh, and by the way, this will all make sense in a minute. I'll bring it back around to Pokemon, I promise. Anyway, this attitude, this whole attitude of fun over anything else, persisted in the 5th generation of consoles. This is the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox era. These systems were absolutely stuffed to the brim with good, low, and mid-budget games that just focused on fun or interesting concepts above everything else. The PS2 had by far the most of these sorts of games, though, and it's part of why that system was one of the most successful video game things ever. Then the 6th generation happened. Probably the worst generation ever, and I know that might be a controversial opinion to some, but when you think about how pretty much all of the bullshit that we deal with in the video game industry took root during this generation, all the anti-consumer practices we still deal with today weaseled their way in during this generation, and all the worst AAA game publishers exploded in terms of revenue and influence during this generation, Well, then it starts to make a little more sense. See, it all started with the most toxic topic in all of games discussion outside of diversity and inclusivity, of course, which was also at the forefront during this time. You see, back around 2007 and 2008, this topic started to come up a lot. A game might have a good narrative, it might have good gameplay, might control well, and just generally be an all-around good time, but hold on now, how are the graphics? And no, I'm not talking about the game's performance. There wasn't enough nuance going around for that discussion yet, not for at least another 5 years, maybe 10. Just the graphics, and I say that with massive air quotes. How realistic is it? How good does it look? Because back then, if the game didn't look good, it was pretty much dead on arrival, unless, of course, Nintendo made it, but they're usually the exception in these sorts of scenarios anyway. This mindset, this train of thought, pretty much on its own, single-handedly led to the degradation of quality video games. Well, if a game doesn't have good graphics, it must not be worth buying. Better spend exponentially more on games to make them look prettier. What's that? Only the likes of EA and Ubisoft and Activision have the money to spend that amount? Goodbye, competition. Oh, what's that? Those publishers are starting to tell gamers that they aren't making enough money because games are expensive to make and they need to start charging extra so they can afford it? However big of a lie that is, it still worked. Hello, microtransactions. Oh, what's that? It's still too expensive? Hello, on-disc DLC. Hello, online passes. Hello, loot boxes. Hello, season passes. You gamers just want better graphics and we can't afford it because Modern Warfare 2 costs as much to make as the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. But hey, you asked for it apparently. The good graphics discussion ruined games forever because it set up an unrealistic trajectory that has spiraled into madness over the course of the last 15 years. That we have Cyberpunk 2077 and Red Dead Redemption 2 and sports and racing games selling themselves entirely on presentation, playability be damned. And yes, I know I'm paraphrasing a lot. Indie game appreciation is definitely at an all-time high. When the indie scene exploded back in 2010 and 2011, kind of as a backlash to this unsustainable, ludicrous amount of extremely expensive games, it paved the way for a lot of great games that are still being released that don't really care about visuals. For every garbage AAA title, there are a dozen good indie games running around selling themselves on unique art styles, niche concepts, and cool mechanics. I get that. But that idea took root 15 years ago and has served as the root of all of our problems because there's a massive chunk of video game consumers, I want to say consumers specifically because, well, that's who these AAA publishers are targeting. And they think this way. They still think this way. It bleeds into game discussion everywhere. So, now that I've gotten all that out of the way, because I felt like it was actually necessary to kind of go back, because we don't usually look back. We tend to forget a lot when we have these sorts of discussions, so it's important to give that little bit of history before I explain my opinion on the entire matter. So let's bring it back around to Pokemon. Because Legends Arceus does get a lot of criticism, and to be fair, still does over its look. The cheap animations, the texture quality, the aliasing, I mean, you know, just look at it. In the context of our game industry and the insane expectations we have for the biggest releases of the year, yeah, I totally agree that this game doesn't look particularly great. But way more than that, I'm sorry, I just don't care. Like, good graphics will always be far and away the least important thing when judging a game's quality. I just don't have the patience for it anymore. I love going back to older games that I haven't even played. It doesn't have to necessarily be nostalgic for me. I've, in fact, on this very channel, been going back to games like Tulip and Mr. Mosquito, which are bizarre, super strange PS2 games that I had never played before. Do they look particularly good? No, because they're PS2 games. The PS2 was kind of an ugly system. It really wasn't all that big of a step up from the PlayStation 1 and the N64. It didn't look near as good at the competition either. The Xbox and GameCube were vastly superior, but the PS2 is the biggest selling system of all time with probably the greatest library ever. Not only does it have a ton of big budget releases that are good, it has a ton of mid and low budget releases that are good. Its library is insane. It could take you years to go through each and every single one of all of the quality games that were released on that system, and there was nothing like it before, and there hasn't been anything like it since. And I have no problem going back to games like that, despite how ugly they look, despite how dated they are, even in terms of their controls at times, which that I feel is more of a deal breaker. But I have no problem going back to those games because they still retain the core essence that makes a video game good. The fun factor. They try to be interesting. They try to be strange. They try to entertain me. And that's what I want out of a video game. Pokemon Legends Arceus, I get it. Look, far be it from me to say that Game Freak, again, the developers behind the biggest multimedia franchise ever, far be it from me to say that they don't have the budget or the resources to hire the people that can make a prettier game. But I have to ask, this is the question that I have for you guys. I genuinely have to ask, does prettier grass make the game more fun? Do better textures make the game more fun? Yes, some of those things can make it more engaging. It can make the story better, but I think the story is the worst part of this game as it is anyways, or one of the worst parts of this game. And also something that's not super important. Does the grass make the act of catching Pokemon more fun if it looks better? I'm serious when I ask that question, because I have played through this game for 30 hours, and I have had a blast from hour 1, well, I shouldn't say hour 1, hour 3 to hour 30. It's been awesome. I will also say, another gripe I have about this game, because I actually forgot to mention it earlier, is that this game does have kind of a long-winded tutorial, and that is a bit of a slog, but once you get through it, this game opens up, and it's a whole lot better. But not for a second did I think through this entire game that if it had better graphics, if it had a higher visual fidelity, that I would be having more fun with it. Yes, I did lament the frame rate at times. Yes, I did lament the technical hiccups at times. That is true. 100%. Lots of games are like that. I'm currently Let's Playing Subnautica, which is no technical masterpiece in its own right, and it's one of my favorite games of all time. Pokemon's Legends Arceus is a fun game, and that's what matters. I'm sorry, that's really all that matters. And I don't, like I said, I don't mean to invalidate anyone's opinion out here, because I totally agree with you that this game doesn't look good, again, in the context of the industry that we have. I think saying that it looks like a PS2 game is a bit disingenuous, because it doesn't look that bad, not at all. In fact, it looks better than most PS3 games. Please go back to those systems and try to tell me that with a straight face, unless you're just talking like The Last of Us or something, or Bioshock Infinite. But this game really doesn't look that horrible. It doesn't look amazing, it doesn't even look good, but it's not so bad that it makes the game unplayable. If what you see on the screen, if the visual look of it itself is the only thing that's keeping you from playing this game, please give it a shot. If you are unwilling to look past that one thing, you're probably a dumbass. And I'm serious when I say that, because you're not only missing out on this game, you're missing out on a lot of much, much better games that do not look very good, that are so much better than the AAA competition out there. I'm serious when I say that. AAA games are kind of the lowest quality stuff that we get these days, and have been pretty much since the beginning of the PS4 days. The few exceptions to this, I think, are console exclusives. I don't really lump those in with AAA games, though. The multi-platform stuff, the stuff that comes from EA, Ubisoft, Konami, Take-Two, Activision, all of those sorts of games, that is kind of the bottom of the barrel. They look pretty, yeah, but that's really all those games have going for them. They're so much better beyond that. And Pokemon Legends Arceus, I feel, is a great showcase of that. Because, again, yes, I know, I get that this is a high-budget, big studio game that doesn't look particularly good, but I also think that people's expectations nowadays are extremely misplaced. Because if graphics are at the top of your list for a good game, you're backwards, buddy. You're backwards. Anyway, that's it. I like this game a lot. It's really fun. I feel like I've made that apparent. I will say that I really hope that this style of Pokemon game doesn't become the norm. I would like to see a few more games in this style, like a Legends Rayquaza and a Legends Mew maybe, released, you know, a few years apart. Please, for the love of all that is good, do not make this annualized. But I think that any more than like a few games would really make this series overstay its welcome. A large part of its enjoyment does come from the newness and the way that it changes the usual Pokemon formula. But if it persisted for more than 3 games with similar ideas, then it could probably start to wear out its welcome, and I could see a backlash forming unless they made some substantial changes to this formula along the way, but knowing Game Freak, I wouldn't really bank on that. I also don't think that this series going very far is necessarily going to happen, but I don't think this game's foundation is strong enough to be annualized. But, I mean, to be fair, nothing is good enough to be annualized at this point. Even as somebody who likes some of the worst Pokemon games, even I have to take a year off from a Pokemon release every once in a while. I also said before, though, I think that this game does have some issues with longevity. It is, however, probably the most replayable Pokemon game, especially due to the shared experience being kind of a necessity. I can definitely see in that regard a few people trying to do challenge runs with a team of only like 1 or 2 Pokemon, and they would actually have a pretty tough time if they did that. Like I said, even with a full team of 6, this game, it doesn't really pull very many punches in regards to how Pokemon works. It's a lot tougher than what you're used to without being overly tough. There's just, I don't know, there's just so much to like about this game in particular, and I just can't fathom missing out on something that's so fun just because it looks like it was made 10 years ago, I guess. I don't care how modern the game is. It's a blast to play, and I want to hop back on and play more of it after this. In fact, right after I record this audio, I'm going to go jump on and record the footage for this. So, pretty excited about that. Anyway, that's how good it is. I like this game a lot. I would give it a 9 out of 10, but as I said before, the technical issues are the biggest problem with this game, and it's kind of what prevents me from saying it's that good. I think if this game ran at like 60, a consistent frame rate, I would actually be willing to give this game like a 9.5 out of 10. But due to the fact that the frame rate isn't perfect, it looks a little bit uglier in docked mode and things like that, I got to go with like an 8.5, I would say. I want to give it a 9, but it's not quite there. Really, really, really freaking good game. It just has a couple of issues that are definite issues, but I don't think the actual visuals themselves, the look of the game, I don't think that that's the biggest one. I'm sorry. You'll never in a million years get me to completely write off a game for that and that alone. But yeah, that's it. That's all I have to say. This was a long video, I understand, but I had so much to say, and I apologize for making it go so long. This maybe a precursor to a Let's Play in the future. I don't know. Like I said, I like this game. And, you know, given the fact that I actually haven't done a Generation 4 Let's Play, this might be my excuse to do so. So, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.